And good evening, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of Conversations with Curtis. I'm Curtis Davenport, and I'm honored to be joined for a few minutes tonight by one of the most important and respected saxophonists of our time, Mr. Joshua Redman. And Joshua, I'm very glad to have you with us. And just to let you know, he will be with us in a very special Jazz Room edition on October 6th and 7th at the Booth Playhouse, 2 sets nightly. So, Joshua, first of all, thank you for joining us this evening.
Oh, thank you so much, Curtis. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Okay, and I have to admit, sir, just I'll age myself a little bit. I've been a fan of yours since your eponymous first album that set us all ablaze back in, dare I say, 1993. So, yes.
That's been a minute.
Yes, sir, it has been.
Minutes.
Quite a few. So just ask a few questions now. Of course, you've had a stellar career. Your newest album, Where Are We? Your first on Blue Note Records after many years on None Such and before that on Warner Brothers. May I ask, why Blue Note at this point?
Because they would take me.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just feel so blessed and honored and grateful and fortunate to be able to be making music. Well, to be able to be making music, period, on any label. It was never part of I didn't have a grand plan, but to the extent that I had any plan for my life, being a professional musician wasn't one of them. So, I've been so lucky just to be able to play with the greatest musicians on earth and to be able to make records, as a sideman and as a leader. I had a great run on Warner Brothers records and then on None Such. But yeah, it's a thrill to be on Blue Note. I mean, Blue Note is, there's no greater label.
Yeah.
And so much of the foundational music for me, as a jazz saxophonist, but also just as a human being. Like, there's so much music that has been created on that label that has been moving and influential for me. So it's great to be a part of it.
Oh yeah, I mean, just being on that label, standing alongside truly the greats of the music. So I'm sure it is very exciting.
A little intimidating too, but
At this point, I find that hard to believe that you would be intimidated, but yeah.
I just the shoes. Those shoes are like that. They're. I can't even begin to think about like filling them. It's like my whole foot doesn't even fit into like one toe of the shoe. So, but yeah, it's yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a gas.
Oh yeah. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Where Are We? Now, this is your first album with a vocalist, and
the first album made my own. Yes,
yes, the first album first album where you've been the leader with a vocalist. I'll put that in the box there. But with Gabrielle Cavassa, have I pronounced her name correctly? Yes. Yep. Okay. How did the two of you come to collaborate? I mean, for her to be in this position of you saying, I want to record with a vocalist. How did this happen?
Yeah, well, it wasn't, I mean, I don't know if anything in music or in my life in music is so-called normal or ordinary, but this was like a particularly kind of atypical musical meeting, because usually when I form bands or collaborate with folks or hire them or whatever, usually like I've known them and made some music with them, played together in someone else's band or met at a jam session, or like we've made music together, and then I think, oh yeah, like let's try to do something more. And in this case, we started planning the record during the pandemic. So wow. I was completely, I wasn't making music with anybody but myself, and it wasn't very pretty music I was making with myself. But I had already had I'd already had this idea of someday doing a record, one of my own records with a vocalist. And actually, my manager, with whom I usually never talk about music, we usually have a pretty firm dividing line. She does the business, I do the music. But she was at a place in New Orleans. Gabrielle lives in New Orleans, and she heard her, and she was like, she texted me. My manager texted me and said, hear this vocalist, and I started checking her out and realized there was something deeply compelling and unique, and really yeah, she just has access to a certain sorts of textures and emotions and a certain intimacy in her voice that I found really interesting, and we started communicating basically on the phone and by text, and planned the record, and then we met like a month before.
Yeah.
So it was a strange, yeah, it still is strange, even to, I've told the story before, and it doesn't seem like the right story, but it is
Yeah.
and yeah, I think it worked out.
Okay, terrific. Now, talking more about the album, it's kind of, I guess, well, I describe it as kind of a travel log. You take us through different places all across America, Philadelphia, San Francisco, Chicago. I guess kind of a concept album, as it were. What
Yeah,
gave you
yeah.
the concept for this?
Yeah, well, I hate concept albums, Curtis.
Oh,
I don't hate them, but I tend to be suspicious of them, and very
yeah.
and deeply suspicious of them when they're my own, because I really
Hmm.
feel like ultimately the concept for music, all music, and especially a music like jazz, which I think is such a such a broadly interpretable, personal, subjective sort of musical expression. I feel the concept ultimately is the music is the concept. I'm wary of this idea of like a concept driving the music and determining the music. I want the music to be determined through its own natural kind of organic flow. But we did start with this idea. We needed something to kind of narrow down the options of tunes to choose from,
Hmm.
because there's so many, especially when you're working with a singer who, knows all these, old standards and new pop tunes and everything. So we kind of started with, okay, let's just pick tunes about places. First it was like places in the world, and then it was like, that's too vast, just places in America. And that it
Hmm.
was a way to kind of narrow down, like yeah, like narrow down the pool, like the field
Right.
of possible songs. And I didn't necessarily think that the concept was going to stick,
Mhm.
but as we started playing the music, and then after the record was done, I realized that, well, ultimately, I want each of these songs to hopefully stand on their own. And the songs aren't necessarily about the cities or the states or the regions in questions,
Right.
not always. But I think there is some sort of narrative or narratives that run through the music. And, yes, I mean, you could say it's in some ways about a record about America and the American dream, but also the American reality, which
Yeah.
oftentimes doesn't align with that, both the romantic and optimistic and sense of potential that this country has, but also
Yes.
the reality that and some of the hardship that exists in the country, the failure of the country to live up to some of its ideals. It's all in there. And then also, I think, it's a way of addressing kind of universal human themes of, love and loss and longing, leaving, returning, remembering, forgetting, hope, fear, just the stuff that makes humans humans, through the lens of place in the United States.
Something that a couple of tunes that or performances that really struck me were, first of all, the opening one, Minneapolis, which obviously made some references to George Floyd, and I know that was one that you composed. So can you talk a
Yes.
little bit about that one, and what, well, obviously the terrible things that happened, his murder was part of the inspiration, but
Right.
what made you decide to put pen to paper and bring that into being
Yeah, I
as
mean, it wasn't, when I originally wrote the song, George Floyd was murdered on May 25th of 2020. And I wrote the song 5 days later. I've really never write music about anything, not events in my life and generally, and certainly not about events in this case, an event in the life of our country and the world. It's not typically the way I compose, but I just kind of felt, that I needed to get something out, not something out into the world, but something out of myself. So
yeah.
I did write this song it had no lyrics at the time. It's just a melody, and yeah, it was everything but the lyrics. And I never even thought that I would necessarily perform it. I just kind of, it was like, you know, in some ways, some sort of like myself, you know, coming to some sort of musical terms with things and trying to gain some sort of, well, not resolution, but some sort of release. And yeah, it was just something I did. I put it away. But then when we were planning the record, I realized fairly early on that we were going to do this kind of, I don't know if you would call it a medley or a suite. We combined Stars Fell on Alabama,
Yes.
which is an old classic, you know, romantic American, you know, songbook song, a very, very kind of bright, you know, bright white vision of romance, you know, the gallant South, you know, and this idea to marry that to John Coltrane's Alabama, which is one of the greatest, you know, social justice songs in jazz, I think, and it's about the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham in 1963, which was you know, another horrific example of racial violence, and also something that really galvanized the civil rights movement and rocked the nation. So that was already kind of on the table, and I realized that I had written this song after Minneapolis. It didn't have words, and at one point I started setting words to it, and I've never written lyrics before, and I wasn't very confident in what I was doing, but I tried, and then we ended up working with it, and it ended up being something that we felt we could explore and present. And so those songs in a way bookend the album, you know. There is a coda, which is Where Are You? But you know, it's you know, they are kind of the, you know, the more challenging perspectives and takes on America, you know. And then there are others, like I said, Stars Fell on Alabama, or I Left My Heart in San Francisco, you know, which are, or New England, you know, or even Manhattan, which doesn't have lyrics, which have you know, a more kind of like, you know, classic romantic, optimistic view. So it's not, I'm not making any statements here per se, but maybe asking some questions.
And also, I just have to mention, you know, if you had Sufjan Stevens and Jimmy Rushing on your bingo card as being in a song together.
Yeah, I don't know if they'd want to be on the same bingo card, but
I don't know. But that was what I heard going to Chicago, mashed up, so to speak, with Mr. Stevens Chicago. This is pretty wild, you know.
Yeah, it was wild, but I think, you know, of all the, you know, there's a few different sorts of blendings like that, mashups, if you will, and that one actually, it seemed the most far afield, but ended up feeling the most natural. And
getting toward you coming to Charlotte here. Now I know we are a stop, and I believe, or at least I've heard, the final stop on your brief tour to. For the album. I mean, we are very happy to have you, but what made you decide to make Charlotte a stop on the tour?
I don't book my own gigs, so, you know, thankfully, because if I did, I wouldn't have any, you know. But yeah, they were like, "You're going to Charlotte." I was like, "Great, let's go." So I'm looking forward to coming. Thank you all for having us.
Sure. And just who, I know that Gabrielle will be joining you here in Charlotte. Who else will be joining you in the band?
Well, this is special because we were able to get the band on the record.
Okay.
This is the only time that we may be doing this in the foreseeable future. So Aaron Parks is the pianist, Joe Sanders is the bassist, and Brian Blade is the drummer. So I'm very excited to have been, you know, when we made the record, I didn't imagine in my wildest dreams that we would actually be able to tour this band, but we did find a window of time where everyone was available. So yeah, it is special.
That is fantastic. I mean, I knew they were all on the record, you know, and they all are, you know, in my estimation, all killers. And I knew Gabrielle would be joining you, but I was just hoping that you would say that.
We're coming through Charlotte unless they quit. You know, we got.
I hope not.
You know, Gabrielle quits, then you're gonna have to hear me sing, and that'll drive. Yeah, that'll last a couple minutes before. You know. The curtain comes down,
Well,
the
that,
axe comes down.
yeah, well, that would be very interesting.
No,
So,
it would not be interesting. It would be horrifying.
well, well, I know you have very limited time. So, once again, I do want to thank you for joining us, spending a few minutes. Anything else I should say in closing? Anything else that our folks in Charlotte should know, be ready for, or look forward to from
Uh,
seeing you next weekend?
yeah, expect unexpected. I don't know. It's jazz, It's
Yeah.
like we're so excited to be coming through, and it's nice to be able to be in a place for more than one night. That's not often the case. So,
And that will be a good segue into me wrapping up and reminding everybody you can see and hear Joshua Redman in support of his outstanding new album, Where Are We?, featuring vocalist Gabrielle Cavassa. That will be a special edition now in the Jazz Room next weekend. We are usually over at the stage door. Because we have Mr. Redman, we are going to be over at the Booth Playhouse. That's going to be 2 shows a night, Friday and Saturday. Friday, yes, Friday, October 6th, and Saturday, October 7th. Once again, 2 sets each night. If you don't have your tickets, you can go to thejazzarts.org or to the Blumenthal box office and make sure you're not left out of these fantastic performances. But Joshua Redman, thank you, sir. I look forward, I've been a longtime fan, but never have seen you live. I will look forward to seeing you there. I'll be your MC, so we will get
hey,
to meet there that night
I'm
and
looking
look
forward
forward
to it.
to
It'll be
seeing and
a fun.
hearing more of you. So thank you, Mr. Redman, and thank you all for tuning in for this very special edition of Conversations with Curtis. As always, keep it swinging and keep it jazzy. See you next time.